Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, social marketers from around the world. My name is Patrick Cook, and as president of the International Social Marketing Association, it's my privilege and pleasure to introduce you to the 36 in our series of webinars designed to advance social marketing technique, research, and practice. I'm here today with a great crew. We've got Christine Jennings, Tamara Harbour, Dave Cutter, and our speakers, Timo Dietrich and Corrine McCarthy. Christine and Tamara are working to, or have worked to arrange today's webinar, and will be managing the questions that you may have for both Timo and Corrine. Dave is our technical host. And I just wanted to let you know about a few developments for the International Social Marketing Association. I'd like to welcome two new board members. Myself and Jennifer Wayman were re-elected as members of the board for another 3-year term. And then we also have Carlos Santos from Portugal joining us, as well as Leonidas Skirlatopoulos, who is joining us from Greece. Both Carlos and Leo are going to be also joining us for a 3-year term. So we're thrilled to have them on board. Also wanted to let you know, as some of you know, we have been developing a new website to reflect our Federation of Social Marketing Associations, and that new website should be live and available for you all by December, early December. As a part of that project, we've also kicked off, or as a part of that rollout, we've also kicked off a project to really streamline our membership process, so that you, as members of the regional associations, whether that's Australia, Europe, Latin America, or here in North America, that you will be able to join one as well as become a part of the ISMA. And then also wanted to let you know that there's a member survey coming up in the new year. This is our opportunity to hear from you, or your opportunity to tell us what you would like to see from your associations, your professional associations. As always, there's some great stuff coming up or coming out in our newsletter, which should be out in the next week or two. So please look for that and visit us online at the ISMA website. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christine so we can get today's webinar started.
Thanks, Patrick, and welcome everyone. Before we get started, if there is more than one of you at your location, please do let us know how many you are using the chat box. That really helps us to get an accurate participation number. And we welcome your questions for our speakers. We'll save time for those at the end of the webinar, but feel free to ask questions using the Q&A box as they come to you. You don't need to wait till the end of the talk. If you do have a question for a specific speaker, please note that with your question. That'll help our moderator make sure that we are directing that to the right person. So now I'd like to go ahead and turn the webinar over to Tamara, our moderator for today's webinar. Tamara?
Thank you, Christine. Today we're fortunate to have two speakers with us, each talking about the co-design process. Dr. Timo Dietrich from Brisbane, Australia, will share his co-design process and framework with us, and then Corrine McCarthy from the US will elaborate on specific co-design techniques. Timo is our first speaker today, so I'll introduce him now, and then I'll introduce Corrine before her presentation a little later. Dr. Timo Dietrich is an engagement architect and expert in digital and social marketing. Currently, he's the Deputy Director, brackets engagement, at social marketing at Griffith. In his role there, he works with industry partners in the health, environment, finance, and technology sectors. According to Timo's research, co-design can result in more user-friendly design solutions. His research has been published in 77 refereed books, conference papers, and journals such as the Journal of Business Research and the Journal of Social Marketing. Timo has facilitated over 20 co-design sessions in which he draws on behavioral theories and tools and tactics, all aimed at bringing the voice of the community to that all-important program development stage. Timo, we're looking forward to hearing your insights into the co-design process today, so let's get started. Over to you.
Thank you guys for that lovely introduction. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Good morning from Australia, and I will immerse you into a journey of co-design. And particularly, given my German nature, I love to put structure and processes into the work that we do and the methodologies that we use. And so what I'll share with you today is essentially how we have now conducted co-design across many diverse social issues for probably now almost half a decade, or even a bit longer, and really give you some step-by-step guidance on how you can utilize co-design in your respective work. So really excited to share that with you. And as we kick off and sort of talk about user input, you know, sometimes we get sort of, I guess, criticized for not addressing users enough or not working enough with users. And I wanted to say that this is not just an issue in the social change space, or in the social marketing or public health space. It's something that we even see still in the commercial space, and that leaves people sometimes a bit speechless. But the reason here is really that user input is something that takes a lot of time to not just find the users and talk to the users and engage the users, but also sort of distilling that information and making sense of that information. And justifying that in the commercial world is actually quite hard. So often, as a result of that, you know, you still see quite epic product failures in this day and age, and obviously from the past. And I shared a few here on that very first slide. You know, when you think about Colgate introducing a beef lasagna, or Cheetos doing some weird cheesy lip balm, that's sometimes, you know, it's still fascinating how this can still come to be. So, you know, us really appreciating the input of the users and putting them first in the creation space is something that we're extremely passionate about here at Social Marketing at Griffith. And so the value of co-design, when we think about it, is that specific instance of the co-creation notion. And it's a way for us to really tap into that expertise, that external knowledge as that key source of innovation. And believe me, having done it across so many different contexts, it's quite interesting that we will always, I can guarantee you that you will always find something novel, something new that has not been yet written about from, for example, by experts or by anyone that has been doing, for example, research for a particularly long time in that space. Every co-design session will always bring some type of unique insight that you can then later on use to build some new an improved program at least. So structure, I mentioned this, 7-step co-design process has been in the works for many years, and it originally started with a 6-step co-design process that I've been doing a lot of work with my Austrian colleague, Dr. Jacob Trischler with. And so this 7-step process is now the latest publication we have brought out, and I want to take you through the 7-step process, and not just theoretically, but also give you a practical example from our work that we have been doing here in our research center with a very unique context, and it's the context of the Blurred Minds program, which is actually an alcohol education program for parents. So it started with a student version, and then our funding partner wanted us to also create a program for parents. Now that is a very different and difficult audience to actually get into a room because that's not necessarily something that they're very keen to, you know, spend time on. So that's going to be the practical case. But just as a general recap to showcase, I guess, the diversity of co-design work that we have been doing in our research center, our team now has facilitated more than 50 co-design sessions that has involved around 600 people, and we have used this 7-step process to more than a dozen different research projects. So whether it was binge drinking, wildlife protection, food waste, and many other contexts, you name it, we probably have it, and the ones that I don't have, Corinne, our other speaker, probably has covered. So I think we can give a good snapshot here today. All right, so let's jump into that 7-step process. First step is the resourcing stage. And probably this is driven very heavily also from an academic rigor perspective, but we get often thrown into very diverse and new social issues or environmental issues or health issues that we are not contextual experts in. I mean, we're after all a team of social marketers, so that is not where we don't necessarily always have contextual expertise, but we obviously come at it with that marketing mindset, that social marketing mindset, and that philosophy of you know, really immersing yourself into that respective audience's mindset and into that problem space. So what we often do is actually first start with reviewing that evidence base if we have the time and the resources available. By that I mean actually looking at the academic literature, what has been published in the scientific literature, and how can we identify then systematically a set of programs, for example, that have demonstrated effectiveness, and maybe use these bits and pieces of information to perhaps later sensitize our participants in the co-design session, or even use that in our facilitation stage, where we are trying to ensure that these participants can then sort of immerse themselves into that problem context and get some ideas in case they're struggling, perhaps to just sort of start with a blank sheet of paper, which is definitely often the case in these more exotic, I guess, problem cases that we are dealing with. The other option is obviously for us to speak with stakeholders, experts in the respective context, experts from our funding partner side, and that obviously are the predominant sort of ways for us to actually do resourcing and really immerse ourselves into that respective problem context. And that has proven to be a step that has a bit of flexibility when it comes to the time that you spend on this. So if we cannot do a systematic literature review, we will perhaps do an expedited literature review, where at least we're able to draw quickly some insights. And in other problem contexts, we might not find any scientific evidence, so we actually need to look at reports and conduct a gray literature review. So once we've done the resourcing stage, from there we move into our practical example of that. So with the Blurred Minds Alcohol Education Program, we really focus on the systematic literature review, and we looked at 12 parent-based programs that existed, that had been conducted, evaluated scientifically, and demonstrated at least some type of effectiveness. And that allowed us to understand what were the important issues to address, what are some of the key themes, and what kind of program activities were these guys actually using. And just as a heads up, we ended up creating these activity cards that we ended up using later on for our sensitization and facilitation stage, where participants that actually entered our session were exposed to these cards, and that allowed them to, I guess, immerse themselves a bit into, well, what was the design task and what were we actually trying to get them to do. And I'll talk a little bit about that when we actually get to the facilitation stage in more detail. So step 2 is the planning stage, and the reason why we have it at a separate step is because this is really the time and the moment where the team gets together, sometimes even the external partner, to make sure that we really nail those stages all the way up to the facilitation point. And these are essentially covering, this planning stage is really covering those first, key steps that we need to organize, and we essentially are ensuring that we understand who is doing what, when, where, and how. So in the context of Blurred Minds, what we did here was, well, we wanted to understand how do we actually, find these vulnerable parents, these vulnerable consumers, because it's a very sensitive topic, alcohol education for parents, how do we actually find them, where do we find them? So what are our recruitment strategies? How would we be sensitizing them prior to the actual co-design session, and how would we then think about facilitation and running that actual co-design session? So these are the things that we then cover in our planning stage and run through in our planning stage. So recruitment step 3 also is a standalone task. Whilst we plan for it, usually the reality across our diverse work that we have been doing is that recruitment can be a bit of an interesting exercise. Now, given we're trying to recruit parents, for example, for alcohol education program creation, that brings unique challenges. Sometimes we also have to go into some remote locations or completely new territories where we have zero, I guess, community connection or zero network. So we sometimes also rely completely on online advertisements via social media, where we then fill these co-design sessions just through that online advertising. So we have essentially the opportunity to either leverage our partnerships, our existing networks. If that obviously doesn't exist, we go online, and yeah, those are probably the 2 ways of really doing it. The context of Blurred Minds and the parent program is very unique. It's a balancing act, hence the picture here. But in order for us to actually run 2 groups in this case with 24 parents that had teenagers, we, ironically enough, ended up in a wine bar and had to supply them with wine and food. Now, the reason is not that we started with that idea, but it was sort of that evolvement of us having to realize that our existing networks were not helping us to get the parents into a room. Parents and friends associations failed, even communication with our local MP here. Our politicians didn't help us to make that happen. So we found that well-connected bar owner in a local community here that was actually able to help us recruit these parents into our co-design session. So a bit of irony here, I always say, and it always gives me a bit of a chuckle, but I guess unique context and unique problem scenarios will require very unique recruitment strategies. Step 4, the sensitization bit. Now, when we look at the sort of lead user literature or, I guess more commercial co-design literature, often, there's extensive tasks that are given to people prior to them arriving at the co-design session. So that's obviously not always possible when you, for example, do it with parents and the context of alcohol education resources. So you have to find a good balance. But you could have simple exercises where you get them to just ponder on thought-provoking questions, maybe write a couple of answers. You could have some type of association tests, or you could actually get them to do some lengthy diaries leading up to the actual co-design session. I have to say that in the context of Blurred Minds, despite our very good intentions that we had, where we really wanted them to, I guess, engage with, well, what should this program look like, and giving them a bit of homework prior to the actual session. Given the recruitment was so difficult, we actually ended up not sensitizing separately. We rather moved that sensitization stage into our actual facilitation stage. And what that looked like is, what that looked like I will tell you just in a few moments. So moving into the facilitation stage, step 5, this is obviously where we have done the initial homework throughout the planning stage, and hopefully here our plan comes to fruition and people are obviously all in the session and we're rocking up. But there's these 3 main tools that we're essentially working with, and this is borrowed from Sanders and Steppers, who have done a lot of work in the co-design space. And essentially, we think first about this session where we get participants to talk and engage with their own thinking. So that's that telling bit, reflecting, rating, and discussing. That's where those activity cards come actually into the equation. So imagine a co-design session where we run an icebreaker activity, and then individually participants are looking at these activity cards I shared with you earlier, and they actually can process. They can sort these cards into piles of likes and dislikes and maybes, and then can later on share their thoughts and discuss their thoughts within smaller teams or even in the larger group. From there, we go into this making stage where it's about building on these existing ideas, perhaps those activity cards, developing new ideas. So giving them resources from butcher paper to markers to post-it notes to really start to tap into that collective creativity of those individuals, and giving them different maker tools so that they can, use those things that motivate them the most. From there, it's all about the enacting bit, so building their own campaign, developing their own ideas, and giving them that freedom to really design and create. And this is where the role of the facilitator is so important, because whilst we really need to nurture people through the process and make sure that they stay on task, which was particularly the case here in the Blurred Minds alcohol program with parents, because they kept wanting to design stuff for their kids, and we said, no, this is for you. There's also the art where you have to really then remove yourself once you have made sure that that team is thriving and working and doing, and you might just be more of a sounding board, or you really completely remove yourself. So what did that look like in Blurred Minds in the facilitation stage? Well, there's essentially 7 elements I just wanted to highlight, give you a quick idea of the time involvement. So we set up this wine bar, which you can see here at the top left. We had the whole wine bar to ourselves. Probably took about 30 minutes to get it all done. The owner catered the event, so we had some pizzas and wines there. And then our sensitizing activity was first that initial icebreaker activity where we briefed them, where we got them excited. And then also still the sensitizing was obviously that individual review of the activity cards. And from there, once they had done that, we got them to sort the cards into those likes and dislike piles and maybes, and then we broke them out into small teams and actually got them to talk about why they sorted things into a respective like or dislike pile. And we recorded those sessions as well. And then following that, we redistributed the teams and then actually got them into that core bit where it was all about building their own actual parent program where they spend the 45 minutes together. And then at the very end, pitch presented their campaigns back to everyone, including us, which we also ended up video recording, which you can see here at the bottom right, 2 images. So that, in essence, is how this session looked. So probably around 90 minutes that we ended up running with, but I can tell you that the pizza and the wine helped so that no one was too stressed and was ready to stick around and help us really get everything out of these folks. Step 6 in the 7-step process is reflection. So this is when we now have done the session and we're left with a lot of data. See, we collect a lot of data in just these 60 or 90-minute sessions or 120-minute sessions because we have ratings of the activity cards, we have team discussions, we have video presentations. There's a lot of rich qualitative data that you can leverage off and actually end up analyzing and working with. And that, I have to say, is probably the one thing that people sometimes underestimate. If you know what you're collecting, if you're collecting it well, in the end you're sitting on very rich data where you almost probably feel overwhelmed in terms of what you should be doing with that data. So having a clear plan for how to analyze it is obviously something that you need to put into place, and that is something where we spend a lot of time, because before we go back to our other stakeholder groups, we need to make sense and organize that particular type of information. So in the context of Blurred Minds, I just mentioned the things we had. In addition to the activity cards, we had the in-group discussions about the activity cards that obviously were completely audio taped and transcribed. We had the pitch presentations. We had photographs taken so that we could actually analyze each of the design ideas, and sometimes there were multiple activities within a bigger program that they created. And then obviously we also always do facilitator field notes so that we make sure that we reflect on our exercise, because often, we end up standing there with 4 facilitators if we have suddenly a group of 25 participants, which has happened. Excellent. So what are some of the key insights that we learned in the context of this Blurred Minds parent program? Well, let me tell you, I said to you at the start that we always identified very new, unique insights as a result of the work that we do in co-design. So as a result of this, I want to share 3 key insights that really demonstrate how co-design adds so much value and demonstrate the differences to the expert sort of evidence-based or what other experts that we have perhaps interviewed will state to us. So like I said, parents are time poor, they don't have a lot of time, so they need flexibility. And that is key in the actual design of anything we do when we create that program. And parents wanted more platforms. They just didn't want to have face-to-face sessions, for example. And interestingly enough, when we looked at all the expert designed programs, the majority of them actually uses a single platform. So they're not really listening to what parents want. The other bit is that they wanted still face-to-face interaction, but they wanted it short and sweet, to the punchline. But what do we see in the expert programs is lengthy weekly programs with multiple face-to-face sessions. Parents also wanted additional resources, but they wanted to have them accessible when they needed them, at a point in time when they felt like that was something that they wanted to access, and also some type of reminder function so that they could have conversations with their kids. Again, nothing really that the experts were delivering in the programs that were published in the evidence-based literature that we analyzed. So I think, understanding that the insights from the users are so important is one thing. The other bit is then how do we get all our stakeholder groups, all our funding partners excited about these insights, and how do we then put them into a reality? And I'll use my last seconds on that, but if you build for change, the last step is really about bringing all stakeholders together, making sure that researchers, designers, and partners and the frontline staff are clear about what we want to do, feasibility, what can we realize, and making sure that everyone is on board. It's not just about those ideas that people come up with. It's about then making sure that everyone pulls in the same directions and that we feed back those ideas to the wider stakeholder group, to our funding partners, to make sure that everyone is on the same page. I don't have time to talk about what we created, so that's fine. I'll move on, and I'll leave here with a slide where I'll demonstrate some of our publications that we have been writing, and I'm happy to share those with anyone that is interested. So I'll pass over now back to Tamara.
Thank you, Timo. Thank you very much for starting us off today and for sharing all those steps in the co-design framework that you've created. And now I will introduce our second speaker. Corrine McCarthy was brought into C+C about a year ago in the newly created position of Market Intelligence Director. She started her career at Procter & Gamble as a marketing analyst, spending 15 years there in various research and analysis roles. She went on to become a marketing manager of brand strategy and development at Sara Lee Foods, and then the marketing director at Candlelight. During that time, Corrine fell in love with all things qualitative, which inspired her to retrain and move back into market research. That led to a decade traveling the world as a qualitative research consultant for Ipsos, doing qualitative research for a wide variety of packaged food companies. Clearly, Corrine has extensive experience designing and implementing many mixed methods research projects. We're lucky to have her with us today, sharing her expertise on specific co-design techniques. Corrine, over to you. Okay, I'm just checking, Corrine, that you're unmuted. If we can make sure that the mic is working.
Thank you. I was muted still. Sorry about that. Okay.
That's okay. You're here.
I'm brilliant, and I'm happy to be here. Okay, so I'm going to start with just another kind of introduction about co-design that kind of builds on what Timo said. And when I think of co-design, it's really the act of creating with the end user as part of the design process. And when we talk about the user, we really have to remember that there are often multiple users who have multiple perspectives. So oftentimes you have more than one user type in a room at a time. So for example, I did a lot of work, as you heard, in consumer packaged goods. And anytime you create a product that's going to end up on a store shelf, you also have to think about how the retailer is going to respond to the packaging and the kind of pallets it'll be sent in and how easy it is to put up on the shelf, because that has a huge impact on the success of a product as well. So I encourage you to think about really who are all the users, and does it make sense to have a session with users, all types of users together. Users really are the center of this design experience, but you also want to have designers there because they're the experts on solutions. They can often, while they're listening to folks, get concept ideas and be able to bounce those off of people and see how they react. Timo mentioned too that we often also included subject matter experts in our sessions. So for example, if we were doing a session about hair care, we might have a beauty blogger as part of that session. And then finally, there's the facilitator, and really the role of the facilitator is to find ways for people to engage with each other and communicate and share insights and kind of bounce ideas off each other, which sounds relatively easy, but I'm going to talk to you about some of the techniques we use to do that. Co-design really has, it's funny, Timo really likes that structure. I'm kind of the fuzzy friend-in girl. So I sort of think of co-design in 3 overlapping steps, which map nicely to Timo's 7-step process. We have understanding the design situation, and this is where you're going a deep dive into what the user experience is. From there, you go into generating ideas, and then you're going to kind of optimize and evaluate those ideas. Today, I'm going to be focusing on this piece about gathering insights on the user experience. So users really are experts of their own experiences, of course. However, they're very limited in what they can express. Their habits, things that are habitual to them or ingrained in them are part of rituals they rarely think about and become part of what's known as System 1 thinking, just automatic turn of how they do things. And on top of that, they really often can't tell you what they want without spending some time really reliving experience. So for example, I spent a lot of time in focus group rooms where people would tell me over and over again, what we want is more variety. So don't make me pick 2 flavors of pancake. Give me all 6 flavors of pancake. But trust me, when you're in the pancake aisle with the shopper who has a toddler with them and is worried about they're running late for soccer practice, they realize, oh, there is such a thing as too much choice. I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. I'm going to pass this by because it's too complicated. So that's just an example of how the actual experience reminds us of what it's really like and helps us articulate what our needs are. So in order for co-design to work, we as moderators and qualitative researchers help them tap into and express their needs and habits. And again, this is fundamental for that understanding the design situation and developing criteria from which you'll move forward. So qualitative research really is designed to bring the user experience to the surface. I mean, that's the whole focus of it. And we use a variety of research techniques and interviewing practices to kind of have those subconscious experiences, feelings, thoughts, themes become part of the conscious. And there's a lot of techniques that are used, and most of the techniques are a combination of these types of things. So the first is creative visual expression, and this is where we use imagery as a way for people to make associations and communicate. Building something tangible, this helps people explore, verbalize, remember, imagine. On Timo's slide, he talked about the Legos a little bit, and we've done that too. Use Legos to build something that shows what it feels like to do ABC. You'd be surprised what comes out of that because it has people make connections and it expands their thinking. Storytelling is very important for getting the real stories out. And then creating stories often prompt or remind people about things that are in the back of their mind that they don't consciously think about regularly. Another thing, and Timo alluded to this a little bit too, that's important in a co-design session is just plain old play and fun. It really builds trust among the people who are there, and it keeps things interesting. And very importantly, it also brings up the energy in the room. As Timo talked, these sessions are usually 90 minutes to 2 hours long, and you really want people there and present and engaged. Doing exercises that are ambiguous allows for creativity and kind of unusual association, and it really creates a space for people to explore. And then last but not at all least is this reflective and personal style. This again goes at making everyday things accessible and shareable. And these are things that are often done prior to a workshop. So the one thing I want to comment on is that a workshop is not a focus group. We do share a lot of the techniques, but the big difference here is that designers and subject matter experts are interacting with the user during this session, and that's really important for both sides of the equation. For designers, it keeps things real. Currently working in a PR firm that has quite a bit of really creative graphic designers, and sometimes they don't realize how creative they are and how their ideas don't translate as well to the average person as they want them to. So having real consumers meeting with designers kind of brings the designers back to earth. On the flip side, when consumers talk about a problem they're having, they don't know all the possibilities that are out there. So a design person can say, well, how would you feel about ABC, as a way to dig deeper into it. So it's really not like a focus group where you just have consumers in a room without that interaction with the people who are trying to build a solution. So what I'm going to do now is spend a little bit of time giving very specific examples of the types of activities that we do when we're doing co-design. And the one thing you'll notice is that all of the co-design activities I share with you share these things in common. They aren't just a one-for-one trade. You don't just do storytelling or creative visualization. You'll see how these activities kind of always have 3 or 4 of those elements in them. So the first one, these ones that I'm going to show you first are often what we do for pre-work. Now, I know Timo talked about pre-work being something that can be hard to get people to do. I've had a slightly different experience than Timo. We use recruitment firms and pay respondents to participate, and so we don't typically have a difficult time finding people who are interested in participating. Where we do have trouble is where we're going after a very specific niche or in fact a group that really can't participate, like people who have disease. We at C+C, we do a lot of work with multicultural audiences, and it can be hard to find people who speak a different language than English as a first language to participate in something like this. So my experience has been finding folks isn't as difficult as what I've heard Timo say. So the pre-work activities we do are often diaries, journals, or blogs. Very recently, we did a study where we were trying to understand why so much contamination was ending up in compost, and we had people for a week save anything they were going to compost in a plastic bag and put it in their freezer and do a little journaling about it. And one of the questions I asked them to think about while they were doing this was, what did you learn about yourself? And really, they learned a lot about the things that are confusing to them, the things that they always do, the things that they never do. And it was really, really helpful in understanding kind of what the issues are there. Writing a story is a really fun exercise for people to do. I usually give a little template and say every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And just write a few sentences. You give them a topic to write about. So I've had people write about everything from their first shaving experience to what it's like to shop for peanuts and everything in between. We typically ask people to use images from the internet to illustrate how they felt during each phase. And we have them, when the story is done, give a title and a moral of the story. And when you do this kind of exercise, again, it does a combination of helping people remember what things were really like, showing you how they felt throughout the entire process, and what they learned, which is really what we want to learn. Collages are very, very similar. I tend to give an assignment, make a collage about what it's like to whatever. I sometimes tell them they can't use pictures of the exact topic we're talking about. So if I'm working on what it's like to buy a car, I might say, make a collage, but you can't have cars or money in the pictures. I often have them circle the image that best shows how they feel, and then again, give the collage a title. And then when we're in the room, people share their collages, and the conversation that people have is every bit as interesting as what the collage tells us ourselves. Because people go, oh yeah, that's right, I forgot. Or, gee, that's never happened to me, what about the rest of you? And you really get a good sense of what it's really like to be that particular person. One last pre-work activity I like to do sometimes is what I call mini missions. So this is actually assignments you have people go and do prior to the session. Recently we did one with for energy efficiency, where they were trying to understand how they could encourage people to buy energy efficient dryers. So we had people go to an appliance store and talk to the salespeople with a mission of what did they know and what did they share about energy efficiency. And they came to our session, and very interestingly, one of the main things that came out was, well, we did research before doing our shopping, and what we found was we knew every bit as much as the salespeople did. So that was a very important finding for us. So now I'm going to move into activities at the session. This first group of activities are what I call experience maps, and in all of these settings, the next 4 that I'm going to show you, you have the whole group get together and work on filling out these templates. And a journey map is usually, you know, how did you get from doing no recycling to having 4 different recycle bins in your home? And people, you know, what happened first? And people talk and put Post-it notes up there, and again, they're sharing ideas and thoughts, and you find out what were the barriers and what were the biggest help to them. And again, this is a way to get people to really be talking about what that experience was like from start to finish. Of course, what we want to do is find out what worked and build on that, and find out what the barriers are and figure out how they got over them and how we might get over them. An empathy map focuses more on how people feel at a point in time, but you can see from this particular slide, we have them brainstorm all around kind of the types of feelings and things that influence the feelings when they're doing a particular activity. The next 2 are more about connecting and making associations. One is a mind map. This is a very simple process where you say, okay, when you hear me say plant-based foods, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And as you can see, each one of these little tracks represented an immediate association with that, and you build on each one. Again, it's just helping you understand what's going on inside their heads. But this final one is where you have people as a group write a story about. And usually this is something where you want them to be writing about an aspiration, something that you hope they'll be doing and hopefully that they want to be doing as well. And as you can see, it uses quite a few fun, creative formats or frameworks to have them describe what that would be like. These activities, you don't always have a big template up on the wall, but they often involve a lot of discussion. We do a lot of personification exercises, and one of my favorite ones that I did was for dog food. We did a product party, and we had all the dog food packages out on the table, and we were like, dog food's having a party, who's the host? And it was like, oh, Purina, everybody knows Purina's the host. So, you know, who's the wild guy who put the, you know, who really made the life of the party? Oh, that's Blue Buffalo, they're really cool, they're the new guy. Unfortunately, the product I was working with was the designated driver because they were reliable but boring. So you can see how this kind of personification can, again, bring out more about what people think and feel about the topic at hand. I think Timo talked quite a bit about sorting and categorizing. One of my favorite stories is doing that with a bunch of different types of bread. People sorted them into like piles, and I asked them to tell me what kind of music each pile of bread was, and when they got to the really, really hearty whole wheat with seeds and sprouts, they said, this is jazz. I'm like, why is it jazz? And they said, because you know you're supposed to like jazz, you know it's sophisticated, but it has all these weird sounds and notes in it, and you're gonna like tell people you like it, but you don't. And that was very telling. I often have people write a letter A favorite activity is having them write a love letter, telling me all the things they love about an experience and how they first came to meet that experience and what it would be like if that experience left their life. And you can see a few other examples that I have here. A want ad. I recently did a want ad for the ideal compostable bag, for example. I've had people write Dear Abby letters. So these are all things that you can do in a group and share and discuss that help bring people's sort of subconscious thinking to the surface. And I am complete. So thank you very much, and I will put myself back on mute.
Well, thank you very much, Corinne, and thank you, Timo, as well, both of you, for your presentations. I think they were very interesting, and I'm sure, and we do have some questions that have come in, so don't keep yourself on mute for too long, because we'll just jump right in and try and get all these questions answered. And the first question came in from Caitlin Hale, and it's got 3 votes, so other people are obviously interested in this question as well, and it's a question for Timo. Which databases do you use to find your academic scientific research articles?
Yeah, so in this case, we went to some core electronic databases: EBSCO, Emerald, ProQuest, PubMed, Ovid, ScienceDirect, Taylor and Francis, and Web of Science. It's probably always a good go-to for any of our health-related systematic literature reviews that we would conduct. And yeah, that can then leave you with a lot of records. In this case, I think we had originally, 4,000, and then you go through several processes to obviously reduce that to, I think in the end, 13, not 12. I mentioned 12 earlier. 13 individual parent programs that we were able to really then dig deeper on and actually do a quality assessment on, and then source these different types of activities and program components that you then saw on those activity cards. So this is done with one of our PhD students on this project, Aaron, who has been doing a lot of work in this space, and that's going to be published soon in the BMC Public Health Journal.
Okay, thank you. And we'll move on to the next question. This one is from Liz Foote, and this question is for Corinne. She says, I'd love to hear more about how you operationalize storytelling in the co-design context.
That's a great question, Liz, and good to hear from you. There are 2 things that come to mind immediately, both of which I sort of talked about here. The journey map really is storytelling. It's tell me the story of what it was like for you to go from point A to point B. And I've done some work for this, particularly in healthcare, trying to create materials to help people deal with certain disease. And so you start with the story of how they were diagnosed, and you move to how did you handle that, and what was helpful, what was difficult, and you move to what coping mechanisms did you use. And that becomes very interesting because you really have people sharing ideas amongst themselves, and you can see what excites them. So that's one way to do it in the actual session. And the other I talked about was homework. And even though those stories are small, what you end up doing is digging deep into everybody's beginning. And in a sense, they're telling their story of what the start of that experience was like. So Liz, I hope that helps answer that question a bit.
Okay, thank you, Corinne. And we have a question from Rob Sadowski. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And Rob says, I can see how co-design is helpful for brand development and message development, but I'm wondering if the lessons can be relatable to social behavioral change, and to give an example if you can. And so I guess the question is, when is co-design appropriate, when it's not appropriate for social marketing purposes? How do you know? Can you use it all the time or just in certain cases? And he didn't specify who this question is for, but maybe we can hear from Timo on this, and as well from Corinne, so we can get both your perspectives on Rob's question. Let's start with Timo.
Happy to start. I think it's a great question. Look, I mean, I want to lead with the fact that resourcing is a big thing that we have to cover. Obviously, you know, do you have the budget to do this? And sometimes the reality is not, or and then you just don't have the luxury of, I guess, going down the co-design route, and you might need to go to some more basic formative research methods. You know, just interviewing a few people, or maybe running a more streamlined focus group. But I certainly believe that co-design has a place in all social change work, in all social marketing practice, particularly if we're dabbling into a new issue, or even into an existing issue where we've perhaps worked for many years, and we're just lacking to think of it in a novel and new way. And that's the whole idea, to go back to those people that we seek to serve and engage them. And work with them to identify new and innovative ideas. And the variety of, you know, sensitization activities and the way you can facilitate these sessions, I mean, I really just skimmed the surface here, but we have done so many different variations of these things across our different sessions that we have run, and so obviously has Corrine. So probably would need to hear a little bit more about, you know, what your respective challenge is and what you're planning to achieve. But I think it's more than just message creation, and that might be even actually something that you struggle to really get out of participants. I think good new ideas, new ways of thinking is probably something that I seek more out of these co-design sessions, rather than, you know, specifics for how do I actually create a specific type of message, because that's probably more back to us, as Mark says, to then sit back or work with an agency to really nail that bit. Hope that gives an initial somewhat answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm right with you, Timo. My favorite answer is it depends. And it does depend quite a bit on what you're trying to produce. Oftentimes, social marketing programs have a series of tactics underneath them, and you might be focusing on just creating the right poster, for example. I will echo Timo's comment, though, that budget definitely becomes a question, and finding the right balance of how many people, how long your session is, what you expect to get out of it is very important to be matched to your budget. A lot of messaging can be done through this type of work. We're typically listening really carefully for motivational spaces and what kind of barriers we have to overcome. And a lot of that comes from these kind of techniques that we're doing. The difference between co-design and kind of a regular focus group is the participation of the designers and subject matter experts as being able to kind of interact with them, which really creates a discussion different than if you just have consumers in the room or people in the room. I hope that helps.
Okay, thanks, Corinne. And this one is from an anonymous attendee, but the question is for Blurred Minds, so that would be Timo. How many parent participants did you end up with, and what is the budget of a project of this scale? So it is addressing the budget concern that has come up already. Timo?
Yeah, good question. I mean, in the end, we're actually, we've gone twice through the process of co-designing with parents, so I think we ended up with more than 50, close to 60. I would need to double check with Aaron the latest number. I also saw somewhere that somebody was asking, well, why was recruitment so difficult? I think I wanted to just share with you all how difficult it was in the first time. The second time when we did it, we knew who to go to and how we could sort of bring together the parents. But I guess I wanted to share that it's not always easy, and depending on your work, you might struggle a bit more, and in other contexts, you might really just find those folks and they'll be happy to come and join. So that part answers question one, and then the second bit about how much is our budget. Well, this Blurred Minds program, you know, we've been working for a long time in this research space, and the predominant investment goes into the student program. So the parent program was sort of an add-on, and us winning a PhD student that has a full stipend was obviously a massive personnel resource that we were able to bring to the project, which doesn't necessarily cost the funding partner. Then obviously we have incentivized participants with somewhere around the $50 Australian dollar mark, probably around $30 US at the moment. Great time to come to Australia, by the way. Having said that, there's not so much a specific additional budget component just for parents. It's more something that we're actually able, in this case, to do as a sort of in-kind contribution through our PhD student, and then through the in-kind contribution of our larger project team and researchers that are giving their time in kind to help make this a reality. So we're doing this on a very low budget front, that part of the research project.
Okay, thank you. I think we can get two more questions in. One is from Karen Ginsberg, who asks, do you have any preferred resources, such as books or websites, for more about the use of visual methods in research? Because she was very interested in the discussion tonight on maps, newspaper layout. TheGrove.com has a magazine template if anyone's interested, collages. So it sounds to me like that question is for you, Corinne, if I'm right about that.
Yeah, it's so funny that Karen mentions the Grove, because way back when I started moderating, we used a lot of templates from the Grove. But a lot of exercises, there's a really old book called Moderating to the Max that had some really great exercises. And there's another book that's really about brainstorming that I refer to sometimes, and I think it's called Jumpstart Your Brain. I can't remember, but this is a little difficult for me to answer, mostly because I've been doing it so long that most of the time now I make up my own exercises that are usually a build on one of the ones that I used years ago. So, for example, I didn't get to talk about the dating game, but that was one that I made up because my client really wanted to understand the pros and cons of each of the salads. And for those of you who are old enough to remember the dating game, you had one person, the bachelorette, asking three bachelors what the pros and cons would be of dating them. So I just turned it into what would the pros and cons be of having that particular product. So that probably wasn't much help, but probably if you Googled cool exercises for focus groups, you would get a lot of stuff.
Okay.
But the Grove is a great place.
All right. Thank you very much, Corinne. And I'm sorry, I don't think we can fit one more question in, but this is a good time to remind people, if you didn't get your question answered, or if questions come to you, as you're thinking about this or another time, I think both Corinne and Timo are available. You can reach them and email them and contact them. And I think they both said that they'd be happy to answer any follow-up questions that come to people. So again, thank you both, Timo and Corinne. Thank you to everyone who's attended and all these great questions that came in so that we could have a follow-up discussion. And back to Christine.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And thanks to all of the participants in today's webinar. Before we wrap up, we'd love to get your input. On screen are a couple of quick questions relating to the quality of today's webinar. If you would be so kind as to fill these in for our own review of our sessions, that would be much appreciated. Additionally, if you have any further feedback on our webinar sessions, such as good times of day, topics you'd like us to cover, or other changes you'd like to see, please place those in the chat box in your comments. We really depend on your answers for development of further webinars. So let us know what you like. Let us know what you'd like to hear more from the International Social Marketing Association. And we'd also like to invite those of you who joined today's free webinar, if you are not already, to become a member of the International Social Marketing Association. When you join the association, at the International Association, you also become a member of your regional association. You'll be part of a network of hundreds of social marketers and have access to a broader set of professional development materials, including our archived webinar series. We'd like to share a couple of upcoming events with the ISMA. These events are available for your reference on the International Social Marketing Association website. And we also have another webinar that will take place next month in November. Our speaker will be discussing social marketing approaches to breaking the human trafficking supply chain. We're really pleased to be partnering again with the Australian Association of Social Marketing. I'd like to thank Dave Cutter for handling the technical aspects of today's webinar behind the scenes, as well as the wider team for all of the work everyone puts into organizing these webinars. I know it's a lot of your time and your volunteer time, and we appreciate all the good work that you do. Today's been a really wonderful webinar with a lot of fantastic resources. So thanks to all, and I'll turn it over to you, Patrick.
Great. Thanks very much, Christine. And thank you. Just want to echo the thanks to the team for pulling this webinar together. And of course, I really wanted to thank Timo and Corinne for the excellent presentations and the engaging back and forth. It's really important work that you're doing, and we appreciate you sharing it with us. And finally, I also really wanted to thank those of you who could join us today. We had a good turnout, and we're really appreciative of that. So thank you for your continued support and participation in our events. As Christine just said, we have another webinar coming up pretty quickly next month. So we hope you can join us for then, or for that one, excuse me. And so until then, please do keep visiting the website, share your events on our calendar, watch for the newsletter coming up, look for the new website being rolled out in December. But until then, this is the International Social Marketing Association, and we now conclude today's webinar.